this is proven to be true, there is going to be a response from Congress. It's going to be nearly unanimous. It's going to be swift, and it's going to go pretty far. And that could include arms sales, but it could include a bunch of other things as well.
But the president doesn't look like he's ready to commit as far as you just went.
Well, at some point, like I said, I think when all the evidence is in, we'll see. I saw an interview after the fact, after he said those things about the arms sales, where he said, if in fact this proves to be true, there will be a lot of punishment for it. It actually impacted the stock market's view of Saudi Arabia. So ultimately, I do believe that the White House, if this has happened and it can be proven, will do something significant about it. I believe they'll do it. I know Congress will do it.
All right, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida. As always, sir, thanks for coming on and sharing your views.
Thank you.
You got it. And joining me now is Brennan, and he's a one-time station chief in Saudi Arabia. Director Brennan, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning, Chuck.
As I was sort of joking with my staff earlier, it seems as if in the early parts of the Obama administration, if there was a problem between the Obama administration and Saudi Arabia, you were the one sent to try to mediate the situation. So let me ask you this. What is the CIA doing right now when it comes to what would you be doing right now trying to figure out this mystery?
Well, I'll be working with our longstanding partners, the Turkish intelligence officers, as well as Saudi intelligence officers and others, to see what information they might be able to share with us, but also looking at what types of other collection capabilities that we have, and going back into systems and databases and to see whether or not there are any indications of what might have happened when Jamal Khashoggi went to the Saudi consulate.
We have pretty tight intelligence sharing with the Saudis, do we not?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How likely is it that we would have a hint that they had some issue with Khashoggi, that maybe they were going to arrest him or maybe they were going to detain him? How likely is it that we had some clue about something?
Well, I think it was pretty open that the Saudi government had issues with Jamal Khashoggi because of his writings. And so I wouldn't be surprised if U.S. diplomats, intelligence officers, were mindful about the potential for something to happen to Khashoggi, an arrest or detention. But unfortunately,
what's our duty? What's the U.S. government's duty? If you have this information, you know, hey, the Saudi government might get aggressive with you. Mm-hmm. Be careful when he was a U.S. resident, but he was a Saudi citizen. Do we have a duty to warn him?
If there's credible intelligence that somebody is under threat of violent attack, that will trigger a process to decide about the ability to warn that individual. I don't know what type of intelligence we had before his disappearance, but if it was an arrest or detention or a capture of Jamal Khashoggi, he is a Saudi citizen, even though he's an American resident. So I am unclear exactly whether or not that threshold for duty to warn was triggered, but it would have to have some type of threat of violence associated with it.
I'm just curious, the release of Pastor Brunson by the Turks. The president said there was no connection. Any connection here? Could there be some sort of, this is the Turks' way of trying to get a little more on the U.S. side because maybe they want the United States to believe their version of events here? Is there any connection you see?
I think one can make the argument that the Turks are trying to improve relations with the United States, not just for this issue, but also just more broadly, particularly on the economic and the political front. The coincidence of the two in terms of Khashoggi's disappearance and Brunson's release is sort of interesting, but I don't know what it was that might have been brokered between Ankara and Washington.
There's a lot of people who seem to be pretty confident that this was likely an order from MBS and the government in Saudi Arabia. Where are you on that?
Well, I think there are 2 points. If Khashoggi had disappeared in Turkey when he was at a hotel or a private residence, I think there is plausible deniability on the part of the Saudi government. But he disappeared when there is video evidence of him being at the consulate, the Saudi consulate, a diplomatic mission under the full control of Saudi Arabia. So their denials ring hollow, very much ring hollow. To go after a permanent resident of the United States who writes for the Washington Post and doing it on foreign soil at a diplomatic mission, to me it would be inconceivable that such an operation would be run by the Saudis without the knowledge of the day-to-day decision maker of Saudi Arabia. That's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I think it is just beyond reality. And so I think it's up to the Saudis now to explain what actually happened.
Would it matter if their explanation is this was a rendition gone wrong? This was an accident. We didn't, quote, mean to kill him.
Well, I think there has to be a full accounting of it, and I think there have been calls for some investigations now. King Salman, Mohammed bin Salman's father, has had a long-standing reputation of being fair, pious, but also meting out justice to members of the royal family. And there have been princes in the royal family in the past who have been held to account for some transgressions of the law, including executions. So I think it's going to be up to King Salman, if he has the mental capacity right now and the political strength.
If. You said if. You don't think the king has the mental capacity right now?
Well, he is aging, and there are indications that he has failed a bit. And whether or not now he is able to muster the strength and the capacity to find out what happened, including the role of his son.
The issue with Saudi Arabia, it seems as if it's always been a transactional relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, no matter which party's been in the White House. Isn't it understandable that Saudi Arabia always thinks at the end of the day, the U.S. needs them more and will overlook these things? Is that what MBS was possibly gambling on?
Well, the strength of the U.S.-Saudi relationship goes back many, many years. But I think in particular MBS has been emboldened. He is a very bright, ambitious, and aggressive individual, and clearly is trying to make changes in Saudi Arabia. But his relationship with the White House, with Donald Trump, as well as with Jared Kushner, I think probably gave him increased confidence to do some of these things in a more aggressive way. Look what has happened in Yemen, and that awful, awful, tragic war. But I also think that Donald Trump's siding up to authoritarian leaders around the globe, the Kim Jong-uns, the Dutertes, and others, Donald Trump's condemnation of the press that's critical of him, Donald Trump's continued dishonesty and denials of the reality, even when all facts point against it, I think that has encouraged MBS to go along this road.
Would you put MBS in the same column as Putin and Kim Jong-un?
I would put him as clearly in the authoritarian, autocratic camp, absolutely.
All right, John Brennan, former director of the CIA. Thanks for coming on, sharing your expertise and your views.
Thanks, Chuck.
Much appreciated. When we come back, those midterm elections and why it may all come down to the man who's not even on the ballot. Panel is next.
Ignition sequence start. 10, 9, guidance is internal. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
For every home project, HomeAdvisor finds trusted local pros. For every pro, you can read customer reviews. And for everybody's busy schedule, you can book appointments online. For every project, you have HomeAdvisor. Go to homeadvisor.com.
Comcast Business built the nation's largest gig speed network, then went beyond chasing down network problems to knowing when and where there's an issue. Beyond network complexity to a zero-touch, one-box world, optimizing performance and budget. Beyond having questions to getting answers. ActiveCore, how's my network?
All sites are green.
All of which helps you do more than your customers thought possible. Comcast Business, beyond fast.
A once-in-500-year storm should happen every 500 years, right? Fact is, there have been 26 in the last decade. Allstate is adapting with drones to assess home damage sooner. And if a flying object damages your car, you can snap a photo and get your claim processed in hours, not days. Plus, Allstate can pay your claim in minutes. Now that you know the truth, are you in good hands?
As one of the nation's largest investors in infrastructure, we don't just help power the American dream, we're part of it. This is our era. This is America's energy era. Next Era Energy.
Welcome back. Panelists here. Lonnie Chen, the Director of Domestic Policy Studies at Stanford University. NBC News national political reporter Carol Lee. Andrew Mitchell, the NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and anchor of Andrew Mitchell Reports on MSNBC. And Peter Baker, he's the Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times and co-author of a new book called Impeachment, an American History. He writes the Bill Clinton chapter, for those wondering. Nice to see you. Let me start with where we just left off with former CIA Director John Brennan and, of course, with Senator Marco Rubio. Here's this ad. Tuesday 2nd, Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi entered the consulate of Saudi Arabia in Istanbul. He has not been seen since. Demand answers. You heard Marco Rubio. You heard John Brennan. What did you hear?
Well, I heard that Congress is going to take action when they prove this, and they will prove it, whether they claim it was an accident, a misguided kidnapping attempt. Kidnapping, rendition is also violence. It's also taking someone, and arguably, if we had intelligence, it's unclear from my reporting when we had intelligence. It may have been real time or afterwards or after the fact, but there's probably a warning if we had any way of stopping it. But in any case, there will be action from Congress. The president's hand is going to be forced. They've already, in the Foreign Relations Committee, gone with the Magnitsky letter, which is a way of saying to the president, you are now under an affirmative requirement, legal requirement to investigate this, which the administration did not want to do, investigate it with a time limit, and sanctions are coming. And this is going to be sanctions against, they've got leverage, the Saudis, oil, the markets. Yeah. I mean, this is a big foreign policy crisis, and we are in a war with them in Yemen. So to say
with
nothing,
them, helping
with
support them.
To
yes.
say nothing of Syria. Yeah. So this relationship, the president is not going to be able to stand firm against taking action.
Now, Peter Baker, Lonnie Chen, Carol Lee, take the word Saudi Arabia and insert the word Russia.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like it's the same thing.
Right.
Congress is united.
Yeah.
The president is isolated.
What strikes me is that MBS is a lot like the early Putin, which is to say there were moments when people found him to be a reformer, a modernizer. There was hopes that he was going to be somebody who could be a friend with the West, but in fact, back at home, he was cracking down pretty hard. We're seeing the same thing, I think, in Saudi Arabia. The difference is when Russia poisons a former Russian agent on British soil, we can unite against Russia because Russia is not an ally. As Andrea just said, Saudi Arabia is an ally. It makes it much more complicated. We're stuck between two friends here, a NATO ally, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, who's been a friend since the 1940s. That puts any president in a tough position.
Lonnie, the way we treat Saudi Arabia.
Well, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are some regional dynamics here that are very complicated. Granted, we certainly have an important alliance with the Saudis, but let's not forget who benefits if we somehow have a fracturing of our relationship with the Saudis, right? The Turks are ready to step in, the Qataris care as well, and don't forget Iran, right? So this whole region actually is very complicated. To the extent that we believe the Saudis did indeed do this, huge problem, and we obviously have to do something about it. But let's not forget there are other players in the region that have interests as well, so let's not be so quick to run to judgment unless we have complete and thorough evidence that just this actually happened.
Well, I would also say that if you step back and look at the way that some officials in the government, particularly in the intelligence community, viewed MBS, there was deep concern about the way he operates. He's very young. He's 33 years old. He is ruthless. He's seen as a little bit reckless. He's seen as somebody who has a lot of rope from this administration in particular, and yet is somebody who, because of his impulses, needs a check from the United States. And so he hasn't had that. And this is the kind of thing that intelligence community officials have been worried about for quite some time.
All right, I want to shift a little bit to President Bush. By the way, I think